Emily Harrison gave everything she had to save her husband, Mark, paying off his crushing debts for 7 long years. But while she sacrificed, Mark chose a secret mistress over her love and loyalty. Now, after years of betrayal and lies, Mark has lost Emily forever. This is the story of love turned to betrayal, and the woman who finally took back her life. Emily first met Mark on a bright spring day. He seemed charming and full of energy, the kind of person who could light up a room with his smile. She was young, hopeful, and eager to believe in the good in people. From the very beginning, Emily felt a connection to Mark that she had never experienced before. They quickly became inseparable, dreaming together about a future filled with happiness and success. But behind Mark's confident smile, there were hidden troubles. Emily did not know it at first, but Mark was struggling with serious financial problems. He had debts that had piled up over time, credit cards, loans, unpaid bills. What was worse, Mark didn't seem to know how to fix the situation. Instead of facing the problems, he buried his head in the sand, hoping they would somehow disappear. But they didn't. Emily began to notice small signs. Sometimes the electricity would get cut off because bills hadn't been paid. Sometimes Mark would disappear for days, avoiding calls and messages. At first, she made excuses for him, telling herself that everyone has hard times. But as months passed, those hard times stretched into years. Despite everything, Emily stayed. She loved Mark and believed she could help him turn his life around. She was not rich, but she was determined. She found a second job cleaning offices at night, waking up early in the morning to work as a waitress. For 7 years, Emily worked tirelessly, often exhausted and overwhelmed, but never giving up. Every paycheck she earned went first toward paying Mark's debts. She covered overdue rent, phone bills, and car loans. Slowly, the mountain of debt began to shrink. What others saw was a woman who gave endlessly. Friends and family were amazed by Emily's dedication and often told her she was a saint for putting up with so much. They encouraged her to stand up for herself, to demand respect and fairness. But Emily's heart was soft. She believed that love meant sacrifice, and that one day Mark would realize what she had done for him. But Mark did not change. Instead of gratitude, Emily was met with coldness and silence. He stopped sharing his feelings, avoided conversations about their future, and spent more and more time away from home. Whenever Emily asked about money or plans, he gave vague answers or promised things would get better soon. But soon never came. Emily's world began to shrink. The friends she once had grew distant because she was always busy working and helping Mark. Her own dreams of going to college, traveling, or even having children were pushed aside. The woman who used to be full of life was becoming a shadow, consumed by worry and exhaustion. The house they lived in was small and cluttered with unpaid bills and unopened letters. There was no room for joy, only stress and silence. Televisie. Health started to suffer. She lost weight, often felt dizzy and had trouble sleeping. But still, she did not stop. Every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the promise she made to herself on the day they met, to love Mark through thick and thin. One night, after working a 12-hour shift and coming home to find another notice of eviction on the door, Emily sat alone in the dark. The weight of all those years hit her like a wave. She realized that she was the only one fighting to keep their life together. Mark was no longer the man she fell in love with. The debts she had paid were not just financial, they had cost her peace, health, and happiness. Yet she did not lose hope. Somewhere deep inside, Emily still believed that if she just held on a little longer, things would change. She dreamed of a day when Mark would finally see her worth and appreciate everything she had done. She convinced herself that love could save them both, that her sacrifice was not in vain. Friends noticed her quiet suffering, but also her incredible strength. They often asked if she wanted help, but Emily always said no. She was proud and stubborn, unwilling to admit defeat. Mark's debts had become her burden, but also her mission. As years passed, Emily became an expert in managing money, negotiating with creditors, and hiding the cracks in their fragile life. She learned to live without luxuries or breaks, always putting Mark's needs first. But the truth was, Mark was not the man she had hoped to save. He was slowly drifting away, pulled by forces Emily could not control. Emily's love was a slow-burning fire, kept alive by stubborn hope. But every day, Mark grew colder, his promises hollow. The man who once whispered dreams in her ear was now a stranger who only took and never gave. Despite the growing distance, Emily stayed loyal. She believed that behind Mark's cruelty and neglect, there was still a man worth saving. The 7 years of sacrifice shaped her into someone stronger, but also someone trapped. Trapped by love, loyalty, and the fear of losing what little she had left. The story of Emily's devotion is not just about unpaid debts or broken promises. It is about the invisible chains that bind us when love turns one-sided. It is about the courage to keep fighting when everything inside begs to let go. What Emily didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. Mark's choices, hidden from her eyes, were about to shatter the fragile world she had built with her own hands. The debts she paid so faithfully were only the beginning of a deeper, darker betrayal, one that would change everything forever. Emily's world, already fragile from years of sacrifice, shattered completely the moment she discovered the truth she never expected. It was a quiet afternoon when she accidentally found evidence of Mark's secret life. What she saw was not just a moment of betrayal, but a carefully hidden pattern that had been going on for months, maybe even years. Mark had been seeing another woman. Not just seeing, but supporting her financially while Emily paid off his crushing debts. At first, Emily refused to believe what she had uncovered. It felt like a nightmare so cruel it couldn't be real. The proof was there in the form of receipts, messages, and bank statements that Mark had tried to hide. Money she had painstakingly earned and handed over to keep their life afloat was being quietly diverted to a mistress. Someone who wasn't just a passing fling, but a constant, secret presence in Mark's life. This woman was everything Emily was not. Young, carefree, and far removed from the struggle Emily had endured. The discovery hit Emily harder than any unpaid bill or broken promise. It was not just the betrayal of love, but the destruction of trust that had taken years to build. Emily's mind raced, trying to understand how Mark could do this. How could he choose someone else when she had given everything for him? For months, Mark had led a double life. While Emily worked herself to the bone, he was living a lie behind her back. He used Emily's hard-earned money to fund dinners, gifts, and trips for the woman he hid in the shadows. The cruelest part was that Emily was still the one cleaning up the messes he left behind. Bills unpaid, calls ignored, debts mounting again. The woman's presence was no accident. Mark was making a choice, one that screamed louder than any words. He preferred her company, her attention, and the lies he fed her over the woman who had sacrificed so much. This was not a moment of weakness. It was a deliberate betrayal. Emily's heart broke again and again, but she refused to let the pain show. She had spent so long invisible, ignored, and taken for granted that she almost felt numb. Yet beneath the surface, anger grew. It was a slow burn at first, but soon it became a fire that could not be put out. As Emily confronted the facts, she realized that Mark had not just been careless, but cruel. The debts she paid were not signs of a man struggling and failing. They were tools in a twisted game where Mark had been using her generosity to fund another life. Every dollar Emily sacrificed was stolen from her, not just money, but her dignity and love. Mark's mistress was more than a secret. She was the final proof of a life Emily no longer shared. It was a life full of lies, deception, and betrayal that cut deeper than any financial wound. She had thought the worst was the debts and neglect. But this was a far worse kind of poverty, the poverty of love lost. The people around Emily began to see the cracks that she tried to hide. Her friends noticed her quiet sadness growing heavier. They saw the way she flinched at the sound of Mark's name and the way she no longer talked about their future. Emily's silence spoke louder than words, but no one could imagine the full story, the hidden betrayal she was carrying alone. Mark, meanwhile, acted as if nothing was wrong. He continued his double life with a careless arrogance, confident that Emily would always be there to catch him. He never apologized or explained. Instead, he blamed stress, work, and other excuses to avoid facing what he had done. The mistress, though unseen by Emily, was a constant presence in Mark's life. She was the reason Mark's debts grew again, the reason Emily's sacrifices were wasted. Mark's loyalty had shifted completely. The woman he once promised to love and protect was now a stranger to him, replaced by a shadow that stole both his time and money. Emily's life became a careful balancing act. She worked harder than ever to keep the house running and the bills paid, all while her heart was breaking in silence. Every day was a battle between the woman she wanted to be and the woman Mark's betrayal was turning her into. The secret weighed heavily on Emily. She knew that revealing it would change everything. But she was also afraid of losing what little stability remained, afraid of the loneliness that awaited if Mark left or was forced to leave. After all, 7 years of sacrifice had created a complicated bond. Love had become tangled with pain, and leaving wasn't as simple as walking away. Behind closed doors, Emily began to plan. She started quietly gathering evidence, documenting Mark's lies and financial misdeeds. She needed proof, not just for herself, but to protect what little she had left. This was no longer about forgiveness. It was about survival. Emily's world was turning darker, but with every discovery she grew stronger. She realized that her love had blinded her for too long. Mark was not the man she thought he was. The debts she paid were not mistakes to be fixed, but chains that kept her trapped. But even in her darkest moments, Emily did not give up hope completely. She held on to a flicker of belief that someday justice would be served, that the truth would come out, and that she could finally be free from the pain. What Emily did not know was that Mark's betrayal was only the beginning of a far deeper fall. The mistress would soon disappear, secrets would unravel, and Mark's world would begin to crumble in ways he never imagined. The story that started with love and sacrifice was about to turn into a tale of revenge, exposure, and a final reckoning that neither Emily nor Mark could escape. Emily's discovery of Mark's betrayal was a breaking point, but it did not lead to immediate confrontation or drama. Instead, it sparked a slow, simmering change within her, a transformation from the woman who had quietly endured to someone who would no longer be silenced or controlled. The emotional weight that had once crushed her began to fuel a determination she had never felt before. Mark, oblivious to the shift, continued his reckless behavior. His debts ballooned further as he tried desperately to maintain the lavish lifestyle he had built around his mistress. The financial spiral was worse than ever. He took out new loans, used credit cards beyond their limits, and neglected bills that Emily had once paid without complaint. His selfishness seemed boundless, but the cruelest change was in Mark himself. His anger turned sharp and bitter when Emily began asking questions or challenging his choices. He no longer hid his resentment toward her. The man who once relied on her sacrifices now saw her as a threat. Their home, once a place of quiet endurance, became a battlefield of cold silence and tense moments. Emily realized the man she loved had become a stranger, fueled by bitterness and denial. But instead of retreating, she gathered her strength. Years of pain had toughened her resolve. She started to think of herself first, something she had never done before. The woman who paid Mark's debts for 7 years was no longer willing to pay the price for his mistakes and his lies. The transformation was not easy. Emily fought feelings of guilt and fear. Leaving Mark meant losing the life she had known, facing uncertainty, and admitting that her sacrifices had been for nothing. But staying meant continuing to lose herself. She began making quiet plans, preparing for a life that did not revolve around Mark's failures. Mark's reaction to Emily's growing independence was violent, though never physically. His words became harsh, accusations flying whenever she expressed her frustration or hinted at walking away. He blamed her for his failures, twisting the truth so that she felt responsible for his downfall. But Emily no longer accepted his lies. Meanwhile, the mistress remained a dark secret looming over their lives. Mark's obsession with her was reckless and dangerous. The money Emily worked so hard to provide was funneling into this hidden relationship. Mark's debts skyrocketed again as he splurged on gifts, dinners, and trips for the woman who had replaced Emily in his heart. One evening, after yet another argument, Emily sat alone in the cold kitchen, her hands trembling. The years of sacrifice and betrayal had drained her. She realized she was at a crossroads. She could continue living a lie or break free, no matter the cost. In those quiet moments, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer be the victim of Mark's cruelty. She began collecting evidence of his financial misdeeds, hidden accounts, unpaid loans, and fraudulent activities that Mark had covered up. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about taking back control. Mark's careless spending and dangerous decisions began catching up with him. Creditors called relentlessly, threatening legal action. His careless promises to the mistress became impossible to keep. His reckless lifestyle was collapsing like a house of cards. But the emotional damage was worse. Mark's anger toward Emily grew darker. He saw her strength as a challenge to his control. The man who once relied on her now feared her independence. His bitterness twisted into cruelty, and the emotional battles became more intense. Yet Emily was no longer afraid. She had endured years of pain and was ready to face whatever came next. she sought advice from trusted friends and professionals, preparing for a future beyond Mark's shadow. The tension reached a boiling point when Mark's mistress suddenly disappeared. Without warning, she vanished, leaving Mark isolated and frantic. The woman who had taken Emily's place was gone, leaving Mark with no one but the debts and chaos he had created. This unexpected turn left Mark vulnerable. His carefully constructed lies began to unravel. The mistress's disappearance exposed cracks in his double life, opening the door to truths he desperately tried to hide. For Emily, this was the moment she had been waiting for. With the mistress gone, Mark's defenses weakened. The man who once controlled her was now exposed, financially, emotionally, and morally. Emily seized the opportunity to reclaim her life. She took the evidence she had gathered and shared it with the authorities. Mark's reckless spending and financial fraud became the focus of an investigation that revealed a web of deception and lies. The debts she paid for years were part of a larger pattern of dishonesty. As the truth came out, Mark's world began to collapse. Creditors demanded repayment, the authorities scrutinized his actions, and his reputation was shattered. He was forced to face consequences he had long ignored. Meanwhile, Emily was beginning to heal. The woman who had once sacrificed everything was now standing tall. She was free from the burden of Mark's debts and lies. Though the scars remained, she was no longer defined by them. Emily's story became one of courage and resilience. She showed that even in the darkest moments, strength can be found. Her journey was a powerful reminder that love should never cost a person their dignity or peace. Mark lost everything: his mistress, his freedom, and most painfully, Emily's love and trust. But Emily gained something far more valuable: her independence and the chance to build a new life on her own terms. The years of sacrifice were not wasted. They shaped Emily into a survivor, a woman who refused to be broken. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. After the sudden disappearance of Mark's mistress, the fragile balance that had kept his double life together collapsed overnight. For years, the secret woman had been the unseen anchor pulling Mark deeper into a world of lies and recklessness. Without her, the cracks he had so carefully hidden began to widen, threatening to expose everything. Mark was frantic. He called, texted, and searched for the woman who had vanished without explanation. His desperation grew each day, as the lavish spending he had relied on her presence to justify became impossible to cover up. No longer could he pretend the debts didn't matter or that Emily would continue to pay the price for his reckless lifestyle. But the mistress's disappearance wasn't just a personal loss for Mark. It was the beginning of his unraveling. With no one to hide behind, the financial and emotional consequences of his choices crashed down on him all at once. Meanwhile, Emily watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy, but her resolve firm. The woman she had once loved, the man she had saved for so long, was now exposed and vulnerable. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, sorrow, and a quiet satisfaction that justice might finally be within reach. For the first time in years, Emily no longer felt trapped. She was reclaiming her life piece by piece. The years she had spent working 2 jobs, covering Mark's debts, and living in silence were behind her. Now the power was shifting, and she was ready to take control. Emily began to put her plans into motion. She took the documents and evidence she had quietly gathered over time, bank statements, loan papers, and financial records, and brought them to the authorities. Her detailed records showed not just the debts, but the hidden scams and lies Mark had used to keep their lives afloat while fueling his secret relationship. The investigation that followed revealed a web of deception far deeper than anyone expected. Mark had not only been hiding money from Emily, but had been involved in fraudulent schemes that threatened more than just their household. His reckless choices had put others at risk, making his fall inevitable. As the investigation gained momentum, Mark's world crumbled faster. Creditors demanded repayment immediately and legal pressures mounted. The man who once controlled Emily's life was now powerless against the consequences he had ignored for so long. Mark's arrogance turned to panic. Without the mistress to shield him, and with Emily no longer silent, he found himself alone, cornered and desperate. The lavish lifestyle he had enjoyed disappeared, replaced by the harsh reality of legal battles and financial ruin. Emily, on the other hand, was slowly healing. The years of sacrifice and pain had left scars, but she was no longer a prisoner to Mark's lies. She was free to rebuild her life on her own terms, and with every step forward, her strength grew. The community around them watched the story unfold with a mix of shock and sympathy. Many admired Emily's courage to speak out and face the difficult truth. Her story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when love is broken by betrayal, there is a path to freedom and justice. Mark's downfall was complete. He lost not only his mistress, but also his reputation, his freedom, and most painfully, Emily's trust. The man who had once demanded loyalty from her was left with nothing. Emily's journey, however, was just beginning. With the weight of the past lifting, she started to dream again. She explored opportunities she had long ignored, rebuilt relationships with friends and family, and found a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The woman who paid for Mark's cruel debts for 7 years was now a symbol of hope. Her story spread beyond their small circle, inspiring others who had faced similar betrayals. She proved that even in the darkest moments, courage and truth could light the way forward. Though the scars remained, Emily no longer carried the burden of Mark's mistakes. She was free to live a life defined by her own choices and values. The past, painful as it was, had shaped her into a stronger, wiser woman. Mark's story ended in ruin, but Emily's was a new beginning. The final chapter of their shared life was written with loss and betrayal, but beyond it lay hope, healing, and the promise of a future built on honesty and self-respect. After years of heartbreak, betrayal, and sacrifice, Emily finally reached a turning point where the past no longer controlled her future. The final unraveling of Mark's deceit had changed everything, but it was Emily who emerged from the darkness, stronger and determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. Legal battles that followed Mark's exposure were grueling. For months, Emily had to relive the pain in court, providing evidence of his lies and financial manipulation. It was exhausting and humiliating, but she knew it was necessary. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for anyone else who might have been hurt by Mark's reckless actions. Mark fought hard to avoid consequences, but the truth was undeniable. The court saw a man who had hidden debts, lied to creditors, and betrayed the woman who had stood by him for 7 long years. His mistress had vanished. His finances were in ruin, and his reputation destroyed. The man who once commanded control was now powerless in the face of his own mistakes. Despite the bitterness and struggle, Emily found moments of peace in the process. Each step toward justice was a step away from the pain he had caused her. She began to feel a flicker of hope she hadn't known in years, a hope for a life free from lies and betrayal. With the court case behind her, Emily focused on healing, She took time to reconnect with friends she had lost touch with, to mend broken family relationships, and most importantly, to rediscover who she was beyond the shadow of Mark's mistakes. The years of sacrifice had almost erased her identity, but now she was determined to reclaim it. Slowly, Emily started pursuing her own dreams that had been on hold for far too long. She enrolled in night classes to finish her education and began planning a career that could support her independence. The woman who once lived only to pay off debts was now building a future for herself. Emily also learned to trust again, but this time carefully and with boundaries. She understood the importance of self-respect and vowed never to lose herself in another person's mistakes. The pain of betrayal had taught her to value her own worth above all else. The community around her, inspired by her courage, rallied in support. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out with kindness and encouragement. Emily's story, once a private tragedy, became a public message of resilience and hope. She spoke openly about her experience, hoping to help others trapped in similar situations find the strength to break free. Mark, on the other hand, faded into the background of her life. His downfall was complete, not only financially and legally, but emotionally and socially. The man who had demanded her loyalty and sacrificed her peace was now a distant memory. Emily never wished him harm, but she refused to let him define her. Future. The cruelty she endured was a chapter closed. What mattered now was the woman she was becoming. In the quiet moments, Emily reflected on her journey. The years of pain had shaped her, yes, but they also revealed a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She had survived betrayal, exhaustion, and heartbreak. She had paid for someone else's debts, both financial and emotional, and now she was free. Freedom came with challenges, but also with promise. Emily knew life would never be perfect, but it would be hers. She was no longer the woman trapped in a cycle of sacrifice and betrayal, but a survivor with a story to tell. Her story was not just about loss. It was about hope, courage, and the power to reclaim one's life. She became a symbol for those who feel invisible in their struggles, a reminder that no one is alone, and that healing is possible. Emily's journey was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. She had given so much and lost so much, but in the end she gained something far more valuable: herself. The woman who paid his cruel debts for 7 years, only to be left for a mistress, was no longer broken or silent. She was whole, free, and finally at peace.